Hey guys, welcome back, and I hope you're ready. This is the final lesson in this course, and today we are going to be talking about lighting. We're going to talk about light quality. We're going to talk a little bit about light direction and the impact that that has on your shot. And last of all, we're going to talk a little bit about how to use your flash in some different scenarios. So, with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at some shots and talk about lighting direction and lighting quality. Light quality basically refers to how soft or how hard the light is. Soft light is generally referred to as soft light because, well, it basically feels soft when you look at it. What happens is that the edge between shadow and light is usually very, very gradual. And in a lot of cases, it's a lot easier to see in the shadows with soft light. So in order to get soft light, you basically just need a big light source. So for example, an overcast sky. That is a huge light source, the entire sky. A large window where the subject isn't standing in the direct sunlight could be a soft light source. Or if it's a sunny day, just go stand in the shade. So that way it isn't the sun lighting the subject, it's the sky that's lighting the subject. But then you may ask, well, isn't the sun a big light source? Well, it may be in relation to our planet, but if you look up in the sky, the sun to us is really just a little teeny spot in the sky. So it's relatively small from our perspective. And because it's small, it produces hard light. When you have a light source that is small in relation to your subject, you'll notice that the edge that's between shadow and light is very, very sudden or very sharp or hard. And you'll also notice that the detail in the shadow is very often hard to see. It's almost black. So take a look at the tree shadows, for example, here, or the shadows of the couple and the guy that's holding the reflector. There really isn't a whole lot of detail in them. And those edges on the shadow are really, really sharp. This is hard light. So let's do a quick comparison of these two qualities of light. So you'll notice in these two shots that they were both done in midday light, but the image that's on the left looks really hard with kind of the darker shadows and the sharp lines, while the image that's on the right, it seems a little bit softer. This is basically because the image that's on the right, I'm shooting into the shadow side, which basically leaves the hard shadow lines behind the subject, and the shadow side is being lit by the sky, which is, again, like we said before, basically it's a very large light source, so it appears a lot softer on this side. In these next shots, I've photographed the same subject. On the left, however, I simply waited until the clouds put the monument in the shade, so that the light source is now basically this giant cloud overhead instead of that little teeny tiny sun up in the sky, which gives me soft light. And for then the picture on the right, where the light is really hard, I just waited until those clouds moved, and now that little tiny sun is lighting the monument and creating those sharp-edged shadows. Now, you might wonder here, well, I thought you said that hard light means you can't see into the shadows very well. Well, in most cases you can't unless you find a way to use a reflector to bounce light into the shadows and lighten them up a little bit. So in this case, because the monument is white, light is reflecting like crazy and bouncing all over the place, which basically results in it filling in those shadows, lightening the shadows so that we can see into them a little bit better. But you'll notice that with the image on the right, the shadows are sharp-edged, while on the left, you can't even really see any shadow line. So think about this for a minute. When would you use hard light and when would you use soft light, aesthetically speaking? Let's say you're photographing a newborn baby held in its mother's arms in a nice soft blanket. Do you think that hard, edgy light with sharp shadows is going to capture the emotion of that experience? Probably not. On the other hand, let's say you're out shooting a surfer riding a wave. Is it going to work better with hard light or soft light? That's something that I want you to think about as we continue through this lesson on lighting. How would I use that light? What kind of emotion, first of all, do I want to evoke in the viewer? What kind of an emotional experience do I want to give them? and which light is going to convey that emotion. Hard light, soft light, or front light, back light, side light. We'll talk about that now. Now, when it comes to direction, I think you'll find that light direction has a major impact on the look and the feel of the photograph. Significant impact. But before we jump into that and I show you some examples, I want to point out that when it comes to controlling light direction, you really have three different options. One is you can move the position of the light itself. Two, you could move the position of the subject. And three, you can move the position of your camera. Now, you're not always going to have all three options. Sometimes one of those might be fixed or two of them might be fixed. But as you're out there controlling and playing with direction, remember that you can always move one of those three things to change the perceived direction of the light. With that said, let's take a look at an example of lighting direction. So here in this shot of the pineapple, I basically had the option to move all three: the camera, the subject, and the light source. The light was basically an incandescent light that I found laying around. And you can probably tell that from the warm color temperature, remember from the previous lesson. Obviously here, I didn't set my white balance to neutralize it. So all three things in this scenario are mobile. In the first shot, I have the light coming from basically just above my head. This makes the shot look very paparazzi-esque. It has this sort of like an interrogation feel to it. When I shift the light to the side of the pineapple, however, suddenly the whole mood changes. You'll notice that it seems softer. It seems a little bit more pleasant to look at, and it brings out a lot of the texture in the pineapple. In the last shot, I basically move the light behind the pineapple and I create some very dramatic light. So we get those long, deep shadows and we get this subtle rim of light kind of going around the object. So it makes it seem like it's almost glowing. This is a very, very dramatic lighting. Now with this shot of the tree, I really couldn't move the subject. You know, that day my super strength had kind of dwindled a little bit when one of my students mistakenly brought this box of kryptonite to class. So I really wasn't able to unroot the tree like I usually can. The other problem was that there really wasn't much I could do about the sun because of those whole superpower thing. So anyway, I decided that, all right, I'm a little weak. My only option here really is to change my position in relation to the subject and the light. So in the first shot, you can see that the sun is coming from behind me, from over my shoulder, and it's lighting the tree, creating front light. In the middle shot, I just had to walk around so that the light is coming from the side. And then finally, I shifted my position so that the light is coming from back behind the tree, creating a backlight scenario. Now notice how each of these images has a completely different feel to it. And the only thing I really changed is the direction of the light. The tree stays the same, the sky stays the same, the grass stays the same, everything's the same. The only thing is the light that has changed. Pretty interesting, huh? Hopefully, this drives home that idea of not just settling on the very first thing you see. You have so ridiculously many options available to you when you're out photographing something. All it requires is for you to take a little bit of time and explore the subject and the area and your own ideas of what you're looking for. So finally here, let's take a look at the effect that light direction can have on people. In the first shot, this is basically what you get if you use that flash that's mounted in your camera. Because the light's coming from the front, it just washes out all the shadows that reveal the detail, and that really isn't that flattering. However, when you start moving the light source, some really powerful and really flattering things start to occur. All right, so before we move on to flashes, I want to do a quick rehash of some of the concepts that we've talked about. So I have my handy dandy fluorescent light here, and we're going to talk first about soft light and hard light, the quality of light. So if you remember, I said that the smaller the light source in relation to the subject, the more harsh or hard the light is going to be. So you can see with this tiny little fluorescent lamp that the shadows that are dividing me here are pretty sharp. There's a pretty definite line that is splitting the light from the shadow. If I move this farther and farther away from me, those shadows become harder and harder. It's getting a little bit darker as well because that's impacting the exposure, but you can notice a slight shift. Now it's not huge because it's not really a huge change in the size of the light in relation to me. But if I take this scrim and hold it up, now you should be able to see a fairly significant change because the light source, even though it's still this tiny light, really the light is this scrim, this huge area, and that causes the light to be softer. So again, if you remember, the light, the sun itself is a tiny light source in relation to us, whereas clouds or the sky are a much larger light source, creating soft light. Hard light, soft light. Now let's take a look at direction. As I move this light, notice how the image, the look and feel of the image, the emotional experience that this creates in looking at this video, how that changes as I shift the light. So I go from side light to front light to another version of side light. It's kind of spooky, huh? And let's move over to some backlight. So we move it up here or over here. Pretty cool. And also, as you're playing with light, remember to play with shadows as well. Look at the shadow behind me. And how does that become, a significant element of your photograph? So consider not just light, but consider shadows as you're playing with the quality and the direction of light. All right, now that said, let's talk a little bit about flash. But to do that, we're going to have to turn these lights back on. All right. Now, before we talk a little bit about flash, I want to go through the assignment for this lesson just to give you a sense of what it is we're going to be attempting to do, and then I'll sort of show you how you go about doing that. So let's read through the assignment. All right, so first of all, the assignment overview. As you think about what we've learned in this lesson regarding light quality, direction, and color, try to think about the emotional impact of light, and then photograph your subject with the intent to set a pre-visualized mood or evoke a feeling using different light principles discussed in this lesson. Try and visualize the effect of the light on the subject before you shoot, and then make that vision a reality. Once you've done this, then proceed to the assignment checklist below. So just to rehash, I want you to approach this with pre-visualization. Remember we talked about the baby or the surfer? That's what I want you to do. Think about the subject. What subject do you want to photograph? And as you think about that subject, think about what do I want the viewer to feel and to experience when they look at my image? And then ask yourself, okay, so which light do I need? Am I going to use dramatic backlight? Am I going to use paparazzi front light? Am I going to bring out the detail by doing side light? Do I want soft light? Do I want hard light? Ask yourself those questions before you go out and shoot this assignment. All right, here we go. So you're going to master the ability to see and control the qualities, directions, and color of light. We've already talked about color. The ability to control your flash and the ability to mix your flash with ambient light. All right, assignment checklist. So you are going to go out and you're going to shoot 12 exposures of the following light directions using direct hard light. Now, I want you to do 2 sets with natural light and 2 sets with artificial light. When I say natural light, I mean some sort of light source that just exists, like the sun or clouds or the sky, that sort of thing. And with artificial light, it's something that has been created by human beings. So that could be fluorescent light or incandescent light or some sign light, whatever you can find out there. So you're going to shoot with hard light. First, you're going to do front light, side light, rear light, creating a silhouette effect, and rear light, where you expose for the subject. All right, let me stop for a second here and talk a little bit about silhouette lighting. How do you create a silhouette? Well, it's pretty simple, really. All you have to do is make sure that the background is in the light source and whatever's in the foreground is in the shade or in the shadow or just not being touched by the main light. So you could do this, for example, inside where outside it's really bright, light coming through the window and your subject is not touching where the sun is shining, but you can see the window in the background. Let me give you an example here, actually. I'm going to turn off some lights here in the studio and show you how to create silhouette. In the studio, I've got one light that is lighting me, this light right here, shining on me, and another one that's lighting the background. Let's create a silhouette. I'm going to do that by turning off this light that's shining on me. There we go. Silhouette. I've exposed for the background and the subject is in an area that's not lit. I'm in the shadow of the light that's shining on the background here, which makes me a cool silhouette. And so really that's all there is to it. Just make sure that whatever is in the background is exposed properly and wherever the subject is, none of that light is shining on them. You'll get a silhouette. All right, let's hop back into the assignment. So next I want you to shoot 12 exposures of the following light directions using soft light. Again, 2 that are with natural light and 1 that's with the artificial light. You're going to play with front light, you're going to play with side light, you're going to play with rear light where you create a silhouette, and you're going to play with rear light where you expose for the subject. All right, so let me pause again and talk a little bit about exposing for the subject. We talked about how to create a silhouette. Now, let's say you're in that environment where you can create a silhouette and you expose for the background. When you expose for the background, with the subject not in the main light, you create a silhouette. However, if you expose for the subject and you got a really bright background, the background is going to be blown out and it's going to look a lot like what you see here, but maybe even more blown out. So I want you to play with both of those. Expose for the background, expose for the subject. Create a silhouette and then blow out the background. Really, really bright background. That's what you're doing here. All right, let's move on to the next one. So next you're going to shoot 4 photos showing that you modified the shadow using a reflector. Whoa, it sure changes a lot in here. Let me talk to you a little bit about using a reflector. We haven't really mentioned much about that. So here we are back in our handy dandy fluorescent light bulb studio. And let me talk about how you can manipulate and control light using a reflector. A reflector is basically anything that you can use to bounce light in. You could use a piece of cardboard covered with tin foil. You could use a shiny pan. You could use a professionally purchased reflector. Anything that will bounce light back in. You could use your watch if you've got a really big watch and you could bounce light in. So let me show you how reflectors work. Here in this shot, you'll notice that this side is totally dark and this side you can see detail on my face. Well, if I take a reflector, like this big piece of reflective stuff that I've got, and I move it like this, notice now that that really, really dark shadow is gone. There's detail in there. I can see detail in there. Reflectors are things you can use to bounce light in to bring detail into the shadows. Reflectors are one way to do that. The other way is with the flash. We'll talk about that in a minute. But like I said, anything can work as a reflector. So for this item in the assignment, find a scenario where the shadows are really black and grab something and see if you can reflect light in there. If you want some practice, go to a restaurant, sit in a seat where the light is shining in, take your watch and just see if you can reflect it into people's eyes there in the restaurant. That's a fun way to practice using a reflector. All right, let's jump back into the assignment. All right, so the next thing that I want you to do is to go shoot 4 photos showing that you used your flash in combination with the manual settings in your camera. So using that flash as the primary light source in sort of a low light environment. So first what you're going to do is take your camera and dial in the exposure so that the needle is pointing right in the middle. So normal exposure, and your flash is going to be set to normal. We'll talk about that in a second. Next, you're going to do an exposure that is one stop underexposed with the flash normal. And then you're going to try one stop under on the exposure, but one stop over on the flash. And last of all, you're going to do two stops underexposed and one or two stops overexposed on the flash. All right, so let me show you what it is I'm talking about here. Got my camera. We're going to walk through this together, and you notice that the flash is popped up and ready to roll. One thing that you're going to need to figure out before we jump into this, before you jump into it, is grab your manual and you want to look for something about flash exposure compensation. Basically, if you have an SLR camera and the flash pops up, there's somewhere in your camera where you can adjust the output of the flash so that it's really, really bright or a little bit darker, and you can control how much brighter, how much darker the thing fires off. So look that up. I think it's called flash exposure compensation. How do you control that? Because we're going to be using it. Okay, so the first item is you're going to do, let's see what we had. We had exposure normal, flash normal. So I'm going to look through my camera. It's on manual, and I'm going to dial the aperture and the shutter speed until that little needle is right in the middle at 0, a good exposure. And then I'm going to set my flash so that it is also at 0. It's not -1, it's not +1, -2, +2. It's at 0. I'm going to do that. Snap. Take the picture. Okay, the next one, I am going to do an exposure of -1 with a normal flash. So I'm going to take my exposure and get it in the middle, and then I'm going to adjust it so it goes down to -1 on the little exposure needle. The flash, I'm going to leave at 0. I'm going to fire it off. Next, what I'm going to do is keep that exposure underexposed by 1, but I'm going to take my flash and I'm going to overexpose it by 1. You're going to see some pretty cool things. And then last of all, I'm going to take my exposure, dial it down to -2, so it's 2 stops under. And then I'm going to take my flash and dial in right here so that it is at +1 or +2. What you're going to see happen is the intensity or the brightness of the background is going to vary, and your subject will remain exposed properly with the flash. Now you're going to get the front light, which may not be the most appealing, but you're going to get some pretty cool, pretty interesting effects. All right, let's look at the very last thing here in the assignment. You're going to shoot 4 photos showing that you used your flash, varying the intensity settings in combinations with manual settings in order to lighten the shadows. All right, so what you're going to do here is you're going to go to a scene like maybe outdoors, midday, sunny day, where you get your subject being lit by the sun. So you're going to have really hard-edged shadows, and in those shadows, if you expose properly, it's going to be really, really dark. There's going to be virtually no detail. It might be totally black. And what you're going to do is with your flash, you're going to attempt to lighten those shadows. So the first thing that you're going to do, subject standing there in the midday light, and you're going to go ahead and set your flash. So manually dial in the exposure and then set your flash at 0. So it's full output. And what you're going to see when you do that is that it's going to look like that front lighting, all the detail is going to kind of be blown out. It's going to look like it's lit with flash. The next shot, I want you to take it down to -1 on your flash. Your exposure, again, just normal exposure. But you're going to dial your flash down to -1 and snap it. And what you're going to find is that now those shadows start to come back with a little bit less and less detail as you dial down that exposure. So after that, you'll go to -2, and if you can go to -3, you'll go to -3 on your flash. Again, exposure stays normal. So when you do this, you'll be able to look at your shots and see a change in the detail. Now, the reason why I have you play with multiple settings on your flash output is because you're going to want to look at that and say, okay, wow, yeah, I like the shadow, but I don't like no detail, but I don't like the shadow to virtually be gone. I need it somewhere in there. I like the shadow for the, for the effect that it creates, but I do like to see a little bit of detail. Doing this part of the assignment will allow you to experiment and see what's the ideal setting to give me the effect that I want. So I can see in the shadow, but I still have a shadow. So go out and play with it and see what you can capture. Okay, just a couple more things here to review on the assignment, then we're going to turn you loose. So once you've gone out and finished shooting the assignment, I want you to come back and I want you again to reflect. So after shooting this assignment, if I were to give you another assignment to shoot something using hard light, what would you shoot? And what direction would you light that subject from? And last of all, why? Think a lot about that. From this point on, as you finish up this course, I want you to move forward and I want you to say, I've got this vision in my head. How do I make it a reality? And the only way to do that is to think about the tools that you have available to you and how can you apply them, and then to go do it. So spend some time on this reflection. Next item, after shooting this assignment, if I were to give you another assignment to shoot something using soft light, what would you shoot? What direction would you light the subject from? And why would you do that? Next, select the image that you think was most successful and describe how the light color, the light quality, and the light direction played a role in making that image successful. And then last of all, select the image or series of images that you think were the least successful and describe what you need to do to make them successful. And last of all, of course, like all the other assignments, there is an exposure log here. Take the time to print it off, write down your subject description, aperture, shutter speed, and then any notes about the light. It's very important that you fill this out because there's nothing worse than walking away with a killer shot and wondering, how in the world did I ever create that? You fill out the log and you got the record so that you can remember what it was you did and you can do it again and again and again and again and walk away with really amazing shots. You now have a very powerful set of photographic tools that you can go out and start capturing that vision that's in your head. So again, do not skip this assignment. Go out, shoot it, and remember, before you shoot, think about hard light. What would be an appropriate subject for hard light? That's what I'm going to shoot for the hard light section. Soft light. What would be a really good subject for soft light that soft light would work really well with? That's going to be my subject. Think about it, pre-visualize, and see what you can come up with. All right, I'm going to turn you loose. In the very final video, I'm going to give you one final assignment. We're not going to be covering anything new, but I want to give you a challenge. So with that said, go shoot the assignment, and we'll see you in a few days, hopefully.